Welcome back to the channel. My name is Richard Gill. I'm a professional photographer, and in today's video I'm going to cover a topic that I've talked about on a few occasions before, and that is how to take a bracketed or HDR photo. Now, HDR stands for high dynamic range, and what that means in simple terms is if you have very strong highlights like these windows behind me and very dark areas, so areas in a lot of shadow, then you need a big dynamic range to capture all that light data from the shadows, the very dark bits, to the very bright white bits. And you do that by taking a bracketed or HDR photo. Now, you might on your camera have a setting that is called HDR, and your camera will do it for you, and it'll produce at the end a JPEG, not a RAW file, a JPEG of combined images that are taken at different exposures. Alternatively, you can set it up yourself, and on the back of your camera you'll have some settings. Now on my Sony, it's in the drive mode menu, and I have the option of setting a number of different things. So I can set the number of exposures, and also I can set how many stops I want over and under exposed. What the camera will do, it'll take one photo at what it thinks is the best average setting. It'll then take another exposure that is overexposed, depending on how many stops you set. So if you set it two stops over, it'll take one that's 2 stops overexposed. And then it'll take a third one that is 2 stops underexposed. And you can alter those ratios as you like, but a default, and the one I would recommend as your best starting out mode, is to take 3 exposures, 1 at the average, 1 2 stops overexposed, and 1 2 stops underexposed. And when all those 3 are blended together, chances are you'll get a very nice image that shows the detail in the shadows, and your highlights won't be overexposed. Now, on my Nikon camera, it is much simpler. It simply has a button that is called bracket and or BKT, and then you set again the same parameters, the number of shots you want to take and how many stops you want to be over and under exposed. Now, why would you use this technique? Well, as I said, it's for those images with a lot of shadows and bright bits in them, and typically you lose it a lot in interior photography, and it's perhaps less popular now than it used to be because sensors have got so much better and their dynamic range inherently is pretty good. But also you might use it in landscape photography. For example, when you're taking pictures of, say, a waterfall in a wood, and perhaps you've got some sunlight shining through and you want to capture all the detail of the water, and you don't want those rays of sunshine to be overexposed. So that's another good time when you might use it. Now, if you're enjoying tips like this, please do think about subscribing to the channel. On here I provide free photography tips and tricks and tutorials on how to get more out of your photos and how to compose and edit your pictures as well. And if you're enjoying this video, please do give it a like. So what we're going to go and do now is we're going to take an interior photo, and I'm sat in my kitchen. I live in an old English country cottage, and it faces east, so it is quite dark a lot of the time. And when you tend to take pictures of interiors in here, I'm always battling with the bright windows in one part and then the dark bits of the room in other areas. I'm going to show you what the room looks like, and you can see the challenge we're facing. Right, let me just zoom out so you get a better view of the whole room here. So you can see I've got these 2 bright windows that are shining straight into my camera, and that end of the room is quite nicely lit. But as I move around the room, you'll see that it gets a wee bit darker. I've got some little under cabinet spotlights here, so they're bright areas, and then behind the sink here we've got another window, and over towards this area it's going darker again. And you can imagine the exposure for where are we? This coffee machine is down here would be quite different to the exposure from the windows. Now what you want to show in an interior photograph is the fact is, what is it like through those windows, especially if you're perhaps photographing a nice house which has some spectacular views and you want to capture that view through the window. But by doing that, then the exposure perhaps for this table that's right in my foreground would be way underexposed because you've exposed for the windows. So we get round that by taking a bracketed exposure. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take one average exposure and show you what that looks like, and then I'll take a set of bracketed exposures and show you the comparison between the two. So I've got my camera set up on a tripod, and that's one of the things you'll need to do, because you do need your three images when you're putting them together to all align, and you're only going to get that if you set it up on a tripod. The other thing I've done, as you can see on the back here, so I've set this to 3 brackets in a continuous mode, and that means I can just press the shutter once and it'll take all 3 shots for me. The other thing I'm going to do is set a 2-second delay on the timer, so that's so I don't get any camera shake when I press that shutter button. I'm in aperture priority mode, so I'm going to let the camera decide what it thinks is the best average, and I want it to average over the whole room, so I wouldn't use swap metering in this case. I'd use a metering mode that does most of the frame. If you don't know how to do that, and then please do watch some of my earlier videos when I teach you how to get the best out of your camera, and I'll put a link in for you. So let's take a normal shot and a bracketed shot, and then we can compare the results. So here we go with the bracketed shots, and let me just see if I can show you that on a live view. I'll just let it run through that again. So that's the timer, and that's the 3 shots. Now if I change now my drive mode to a single shot, I'm still going to use the 2-second timer because I'm still on the tripod, and you can see that the exposure is a 1/4 of a second, so it's quite a long exposure as well. Another good reason why you're going to need to set up on a tripod if you're doing interiors. Okay, and now we can compare the finished results. Now you can see in the one that's straight out of the camera what the challenge was for the camera, and it's done a pretty good job of it, really. You can see the windows a little bit overexposed, some areas a little bit too dark. But when I take that into processing, and I process this in Lightroom, then the finished result is really pretty good. Now we're actually lucky today. It's overcast, so I haven't got strong sunlight beaming through the windows. I've got a nice soft light. If it had been a really strong sunny day, then the results wouldn't have been as good. But I have to say the range on the Sony camera that I'm using, that's the A7 III, is really good, and it's produced a very good result. However, if we now look at the finished combined bracketed exposures, so this is the 3 exposures put together, you can see something that is brought out all the detail I want. I can see properly what is the other side of the glass in the windows. Also, any of the interior lights, they're not as bright, they're not blown, and they add some nice color to the image. So overall, probably a more pleasing result. Overall, not a huge amount of difference, but it does illustrate to you the principle of why you would use bracketed exposures, and that's to be able to blend those photos to get all the details in both the shadows and the highlights. So it is a useful technique for you to know how to use it. Now, a top tip for you is you can buy software if you're not already into processing your photos. There is some nice software packages that will do this for you. Of course, you can use Adobe Lightroom, which has the option to merge 3 photos as a HDR. There's also another package that I sometimes use called Aurora. You can buy it as a one-off solution. You don't have to subscribe like you do with the Adobe Creative Cloud stuff, and it'll cost you I think about £70 or $70. I think it's probably $70. It's probably the same in both currencies. And that will do the same thing for it. It'll blend you the 3 images, but it also gives you the option of applying some what it calls looks to it. So you can do things like you choose, and it's really a set of exposure and filter settings that it'll make your photo look a particular style, and it has ones for interiors, it has ones for landscapes and so on. So that's quite a nice solution. Now, you can join our Nifty 50 Photographers Facebook group if there's any photos you'd like to share and get feedback on. Alternatively, let me know in the comments whether you want a particular topic covering or want some particular feedback on your photos, and I'll do my best to help. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.